All right, today we're going to dive into one of the most important, but maybe one of the most misunderstood parts of a tube amp, setting the bias. Honestly, it's the secret sauce for getting the absolute best tone and the longest life out of your amp. So let's get right into it.
You know, this quote from Reddit really just nails it, doesn't it? The magic of tube amps is that you can completely change your sound just by swapping out a few of those glowing glass bottles. It's that amazing flexibility that really pulls us in. But, and this is a big but, to do it right, and more importantly, to do it safely, you've got to understand what's actually happening under the hood.
And that brings us right to our first, and I mean most important point. Look, we have to be super clear here. The inside of a tube amplifier is a seriously dangerous place. We are talking about voltages that can absolutely kill you if you're not careful. And get this, even when it's unplugged, the capacitors inside can hold a lethal charge. You have to respect the electricity. So that's really what this is all about, navigating that line between the incredible, alluring sound of these machines and the very real alarm bells that should be ringing before you even think about opening one up. So what even is bias? Well, at its heart, it's just the baseline setting for your power tubes. Think of it as the amount of electricity flowing through them when you're not playing a single note. You'll also hear it called the quiescent point, which is just a fancy way of saying the point where the tube is at rest, but totally ready to jump into action.
Probably the best way to wrap your head around it is to think of a car engine. Bias is like the idle speed. If you set it too low, the engine's going to feel sluggish. It might even stall when you hit the gas. But if you set it too high, well, you're just burning fuel for no reason and putting a ton of extra wear and tear on the engine. What you want is that perfect, smooth idle, ready to go the second you need it.
So why should you care about all this? Because getting the bias right changes everything. Seriously, it makes your expensive tubes last as long as possible, it protects the guts of your amplifier, and maybe most importantly, it's the absolute foundation of your tone. If you get it wrong, you're going to get extra hum, some nasty distortion, and just a sound that feels flat. Okay, so before you even think about reaching for a screwdriver or a multimeter, you've got some homework to do. You can't just guess at this. You need to know what the right bias setting is in the first place. So let's run through the pre-flight checklist.
You need to know 3 critical things. First, your amp's class. Basically, how the tubes work together. Most guitar amps are class AB. Second, you need the plate voltage. That's the high voltage DC that feeds your tubes. And third, you gotta know the exact type of tube you're using, because an EL34 is a totally different beast than a 6L6 or a KT88.
Now, how do we find that plate voltage? Well, the most accurate way is to measure it yourself, right at the source. For a lot of common tubes, that means carefully measuring the DC voltage between pin 3 and pin 8 on the socket. This tells you the actual voltage the tube is getting, not just some number you read on a schematic. And we've got to pause here again, because this is where things get real. Poking around inside a live, powered-on amplifier with metal probes, it's serious business. If looking at this makes you feel even a little bit nervous, that's a good thing. That's your brain telling you to stop and take the amp to a pro. There is zero shame in that.
Okay, so assuming you've got the skills and the gear to move forward safely, the next step is actually measuring that idle current. There are a few ways to get this done, and they range from super safe and easy to stuff that's really only for the seasoned pros. Let's check out the options.
Check this out. On the left, you've got a bias adapter. This thing is a lifesaver. It just plugs in between your tube and the socket and gives you safe test points on the outside of the amp. It is by far the safest and easiest way to do this. On the right, that's the shunt method. It's way more advanced and involves measuring across the output transformer. It can be super risky if you don't know exactly what you're doing. So here are the main ways you can measure that current. Some lucky people have amps with test points built right in. But for most of us, that bias adapter is going to be your best friend. It's the safest way to go without having to mod your amp. The other methods, honestly, they're best left to the experts. All right, we've done our homework, we've taken our measurements safely. Now we get to the fun part, turning that tiny little screw inside the amp and actually dialing in the tone. This table right here is where it all comes together. It shows you the target current range for an EL34 tube. So you just find your plate voltage on the left. Let's say you measured 450 volts. Boom. The table tells you that your sweet spot for the idle current is somewhere between 28 and 39 milliamps. So where in that range should you set it? Well, this is the great debate.
Biasing hot, up near that 70% mark, usually gives you a fuller, more dynamic, more responsive tone. It can sound amazing, but it comes at a cost. It really puts a strain on your tubes and shortens their lifespan. On the flip side, biasing cold, down near 50%, is fantastic for making your tubes last forever, but sometimes it can leave the amp sounding a little thin or sterile. It's the classic trade-off: tone versus tube life.
Okay, now for a quick dose of reality. You will absolutely drive yourself insane trying to get every single tube to read the exact same number. In the real world of guitar amps, a difference of up to 5 milliamps between your tubes is totally fine.
And the reason for that is simple. Perfect components only exist in textbooks, right? Every tube, every part in your amp has tiny variations. They're not all identical. So your goal isn't some impossible, perfect match. The goal is to find a good, stable average where all your tubes are working happily and safely inside that target range. Look, we're going to say this one last time because it is the most important thing to take away from all of this. This can be a dangerous job. If at any point you feel like you're in over your head, just stop. Your safety and your amp are worth way more than the cost of a trip to a good tech.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, the one every single tube amp owner has to answer for themselves. Now that you know the deal, now that you understand the trade-offs, where do you land? Are you chasing that perfect, hot, dynamic tone, even if it means you're buying tubes more often? Or are you all about protecting your investment and making those tubes last? It's your call.